of people won't get no supper tonight. A lot of people going to supper tonight. God.
There's a very interesting video on this platform titled Sluggish Morss, the most WTF game ever made. It was released in 2013 by popular Let's Player Markiplier, and for some reason since that day, it has forever fascinated me. Which is odd because this video is quite generic for most Markiplier content. Hell, you could even call it boring. It's 18 minutes of Mark playing through this obscure art game, Sluggish Morss, as he looks on in confusion. He's mostly silent throughout the entire thing, being completely shocked out of saying much at all for the first couple minutes before going into his intro. His commentary, at least compared to his other videos, is very sparse. He doesn't say much outside of the simple what the fuck is happening, or describing what's on screen. There's little riffs or gags to be found. He just sits there, confused, unnerved, and lost, as if he's trying to understand what must not be understood. And in a way, he kind of is. Sluggish Morss is a video game series that's hard to explain and harder to wrap your mind around. It's an anthology-esque series of 5 games by British game developer Jack King Spooner, known for creating abstract art games in the independent gaming community. His most popular game is Dujana, a surreal claymation adventure about death, war, and asking whether or not something is a pie or an anus. The majority of his games, including the entirety of the Sluggish Morss series, are very light on actual gameplay. You walk around in strange landscapes and you talk to people or do tasks to them, just explore. And in Dujana, the plot in that is quite easy to grasp, even if it is a bit word-heavy. But in the Sluggish Morss series, it's the exact opposite. Each game is focused heavily on metaphor and underlying emotion rather than a straight plot, and the anthology nature of the whole thing makes it even more difficult to parse. From what I can understand, it's mostly a series of stories of characters living in a horrific hyper-capitalist dystopia. Each game absolutely has its own standalone plot, don't get me wrong, and you can probably interpret what you want from that very easily. And I don't really want to spoil what I personally interpreted. I think that you can play it and get what you find. That's not what this video is about. I just want to make it clear that this story is quite engaging, even if it is difficult to follow at times. Anyways, even if you don't quite get what's going on in Sluggish Morss, it is still an incredibly well-crafted series. The aesthetic and style of the games are all exquisite. It's a style-bending nightmare that you can't look away from. It's claymation glitched to the highest degree. Many of the dialogue and musical choices are also great, creating an experience that cuts into the core of your psyche and emotions without needing to say or tell much at all. It gives me a similar vibe to David Lynch's work, particularly Inland Empire and Eraserhead, both of which are very light on plot, but have such immaculate vibes that I can't help but be entranced by their stories. I could also compare it to beat poets, particularly William Burroughs, whose works are difficult to truly understand if you're reading them for a traditional story, but under the surface gives you much more emotional than you could ever imagine. It's clearly intentional on the part of Spooner. The description to his trailer for the 5th game in the Sluggish Morss series, Pattern Circus, is,
"There was a book that meant something different to every reader, even though the words and phrases were the same. It was an extension to the mind. When reread, the reader would determine that they read it well enough the first time."
In a way, this description fits perfectly with Sluggish Morss's writing style, which can easily be interpreted in a number of ways depending on how you're feeling at whatever time you're reading it. There's a moment in Ad Infinitum, the 3rd game of the series, where you collect a singular coin in a cave system of sorts. It transports you to a completely different area, showing distorted pictures of faces with captions such as "I was never your friend" and "I'm so fucking scared of being alone." Plot-wise, it's meaningless and doesn't tell anything about what's going on or what you're doing, but emotionally, its sudden experience with its unnerving music hits harder than anything I have seen to that point, and made me genuinely sob, even though it was basically just a meaningless non-sequitur. It still hit that core in me. It resonated with emotions I was feeling at that time, because trying to interpret Sluggish Morss stripped me down to my bare essentials. It made me raw. I was looking for anything to ground myself, including a lot of sensitive topics that made moments like that really hit home for me. In this game, your emotions lie on the table for Spooner to toy with endlessly, and he does it perfectly. Maybe that's why Markiplier, someone who focuses on loud comedic commentary, someone who has a very clear persona that he doesn't really drift away from, and somebody whose viewers don't really know who he truly is, was so confused and silent when playing Sluggish Morss. because he didn't want to show his emotional core. He didn't want to truly relate to the game on its level. And when you can't do that, all you're left to say is just stare on in astonishment and say, what the fuck is going on in here?
Don't recognize me, look the same. I've been acting good, I've been acting strange. Won't recognize me, won't recognize me.
That question, WTF is happening, is quite common in online discussion of surrealism, and it really gets under my skin at times because it shows such a simplification of really interesting pieces of art. Instead of treating it as something to interpret, to experience in your own way, it ends up making these works into jokes, something to laugh at. Haha, look at how weird this game is. Sluggish Morss, what does that even mean? It's so disappointing to see, because I really want experimental stories and games like Sluggish Morss to become more recognized among people, become the cult classic it deserves to be, but instead it's treated like a joke. It's insulting. Maybe it's because these pieces of art don't conform to the general belief of what art should be. You don't see many games like Sluggish Morss out there, especially ones that aren't popular. Games that are unforgiving about the core aesthetic values they want to present. Games that make you question what a game can be. And seeing that might make you think less that this is a well-presented piece of absurdist art, and more that it's simply random game design for the sake of it. And that not only hurts critique in general, how we view this art, but it also tends to hurt the developers themselves. Because a lot of arty alt games are incredibly personal to whoever created it. Expressing their emotions through their art is very important to a creator. That's what they do. All art is an emotional experience, and simplifying that, ignoring the emotional piece that's important to them, really ends up insulting the people who created it, not wanting to connect with them. That hurts. Game dev Nathalie released an article in 2017 after their excellent game Everything Will Be Okay was shown at the Day of the Devs showcase by Double Fine Studios. In this article, they recount the general gaming consumer impression of their game, and it discusses the emotional impact it gave them. It's well worth a read if you're interested in this sort of thing, but I'll show some of the highlights here because I think it puts streamers' effects on young viewers and their reaction to strange art games in a much clearer lens.
I point this out because the rude stuff was totally in line with how streamers and popular YouTubers talk about these games. Oh, what the fuck is this? What the hell? Weird ass game. Lol, acid. Haha, who the hell would make this? You know, the default slew of mockery. This came mostly from younger people. It hit me how much influence streamers and YouTubers have on public opinion of these games, and this is really becoming a problem. I mean, I know it was before, but damn. It's negatively impacting how people are able to talk about art games, or even be open to these more experimental, interactive experiences. Streaming what the fuck and all the other standard jokes is not a good predominant attitude to propagate towards these games, or their creators. We should be aware that this is a problem, more than maybe we thought. I don't know what to do about that. I really would like to encourage some constructive criticism towards streamers and how they talk about these games. Just because some famous guy with whatever million followers plays it, this isn't an honor or necessarily a good thing. It doesn't really help sales or exposure. The last time one did that, I got a slew of hateful comments in email. It kinda hit me hard because this is also a personal game, and people will cater their attacks based on what they know I've been through. The way streamers treat these games can be really damaging. It sets a precedent to how other people will be behaving.
This was in 2017, the peak of the commentator and annoying Let's Player demographics on YouTube. It was quite annoying and probably painful if you were in the hot seat like Nathalie was, or how Spooner was. I'm sure he got his fair share of harassment and infamy due to how Sluggish Morss was treated online. But I don't want to act like we're hopeless, like a whole generation believes surreal art is just WTF drugs or whatever. Even though a lot of people are, and that is sad, we are getting better though. Our collective response to avant-garde art has gotten better. More people on the internet are discussing strange and surreal games for what they are, interesting, well-made, and beautiful. YouTubers such as Nitro Rad and Ron Signal have based their content on respectful, interesting, and deep critique of games you might not have heard of, trying to show them to an audience that might not know what they are. And that's really wonderful to see, because a lot of them talk about games like the works of Nathalie or Jack King Spooner. Hell, even games such as Hylix or Cruelty Squad, who revel in their detaching graphics and uncomfortable writing, and just go utterly ham on being pretty inaccessible to anybody who's not in that scene. They're allowed to have cult fan bases, which they have slowly grown over the course of praise from YouTubers such as them. They would all be roasted a high hell by most streamers, and yet they have a dedicated and loving fan base that appreciates them for what they are. Hell, even larger gaming channels such as Video Game Donkey and his video on Cruelty Squad can not only treat the game as an actually interesting piece of art, showing that it's worth your time, but also get a lot of comedy out of it.
Breaching! 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 Objective secured.
You can be funny without being disrespectful, it's okay, you just need to accept it on the game's terms and not on your own. You need to be open-minded to what you play, and then make jokes about that. So yeah, maybe nobody wants to talk about Sluggish Morss. Nobody wants to treat it with the respect it, as a beautiful piece of strange art, deserves. But we are slowly getting to a world where games like it can be loved by the masses. And I wish them the best getting there. This is Rebecca Kimple, and I hope you have a good night.